Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. It is very clear going into the spring practice window that Michigan has a lot of momentum on the recruiting trail. And I think there's some Michigan fans that might be looking at me and saying, hey, what do you mean Michigan has a ton of momentum on the recruiting trail? We haven't had a commitment over the last couple of weeks. Yeah, that's fair. I think what I would say is momentum comes in different ways when you're talking the recruiting trail. Sure, momentum can be 3 commitments in 3 days, kind of like what we saw Michigan go through in the later stages of November, closing out signing day. But momentum can also look like what it's going to look like for Michigan over the next couple of days up in Ann Arbor, where you have, double digit blue chip prospects making their way to Ann Arbor from all over the country. And it's kind of been the storyline throughout the offseason for this Michigan program. And that is, it just feels different on the recruiting trail. You go back 2 years ago under Jim Harbaugh, and this is certainly not a shot at my guy, Jim Harbaugh. You all know I'm a Michigan fan. You all know how much I appreciate Jim. But when was the last time we've had a spring visit weekend where we're hosting 10 top 200 national prospects from all over the country? It just didn't happen for Michigan. It's going to happen this weekend for Michigan. And what I want to do today is look, we can't go through every single name that's going to be on campus. That would take us probably 90 minutes to do. what I want to do is kind of highlight the names that intrigue me the most that will be on campus for Michigan. I'm fans, you guys, you all know how much fun I've had talking this program on the recruiting trail. The amount of support that you guys continue to show to the boys has been absolutely amazing. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it. And you make no mistake about it, the headliner here is Jackson Cantwell. Arguably one of the most impressive offensive tackle prospects we've seen come out of high school in really the last 5 years. We've talked about him a lot as a player, 6'7.5", 300 pounds, carries that 300 pounds exceptionally well. Very good athlete. The best part about his game is the power. You talk about Sherrone Moore and the motto of this Michigan offense being smash. I don't think there's a player across the country that represents smash football like Jackson Cantwell. This does seem to be a match that makes a lot of sense for both parties. And I think the second thing is, and this is something we've seen from Michigan, is the guys that Michigan wants, they will push their chips in to go out and get. We saw it with Bryce Underwood last year. We saw it with Ty Haywood last year. We saw it with Andrew Babalola last class. You even saw it a couple of times in the transfer portal with a guy like Justice Haynes. When it is time to pony up and push your chips in and be as competitive as possible for some of these top prospects, Michigan has kind of changed that narrative. I don't know 2 years ago if Michigan would push all their chips into the middle of the table for a guy like Jackson Campbell. They are clearly trying to do that in this 2026 class. And any chance you get to lock in what I think is a, franchise tackle, you might say, for college football, which Jackson Campbell, I think, is, you're going to do it, especially when you're Sherrone Moore. We'll see how it goes. I think it's going to be really interesting to see. You're kind of battling Oregon. You're battling Ohio State. I think Michigan is certainly in that top-tier contender category for Jackson Campbell, and this visit is going to tell us a lot where Michigan stands for a guy like Jackson Campbell. Now, another name that if I'm a Michigan fan, and I certainly love this kid, Carter Meadows, also going to be on campus for Michigan. I believe he's on campus actually today. 6'6", 215 pounds from Washington, D.C. What intrigues me the most about Carter Meadows is it's a very similar vibe to Andrew Babalola. And what was so important about Andrew Babalola is he really cared about the academic side of things. Who does Michigan battle in the most for Andrew Babalola? Stanford. Carter Meadows, very similar conversation. He just took a visit to Northwestern last weekend. That gives Michigan that, kind of ideal spot where you can balance. You're going to a premier college football program, a program that doesn't get much better in terms of developing edge rushers, but also giving him one of the better educations that you see in the country. That was a thing that I think helped Michigan out with Andrew Babalola, and I think it's going to help Michigan out with Carter Meadows too. Now, Carter Meadows as a prospect, this is David Ajabo 2.0. We've talked about him. I would be surprised if Carter Meadows comes in and immediately plays as a freshman. Heck, I would be surprised if he was an all-conference guy during year 2. But what was the thing with David Ajabo? Year 3, you never heard of David Ajabo for the first 2 years. Then year 3, he became one of the best pass rushers in the country. Carter Meadows, very, very similar kind of prospect with an astronomically high upside. And if you are Michigan, you're not only pointing to a guy like David Ajabo, but you're pointing to guys like Josiah Stewart or like TJ Moore or Derek Moore or a guy like TJ Guy, Jalen Harrell, Braden McGregor. If you are Michigan here, you obviously have to be competitive on the NIL front. You're selling, the Big Ten championships and national championships that Michigan has won over the last couple of years. But what you're also selling, especially when it comes to the line of scrimmage players, is all the success that Michigan has had developing these guys into future NFL football players. And Carter Meadows, you make no mistake about it, it's a guy that has NFL written all over him. It's not going to be immediately in year 1, but this is a guy that if he maximizes himself, you're really looking at one of the better edge rushers that you see in all of college football. Another name to monitor, and I think a name, quite frankly, to monitor potentially for commitment is Matt Ludwig from Montana. This kid's fascinating, and it's really hard to get a sense on the film because he is playing up there in the state of Montana. It's about what you would envision a four-star prospect playing up in Montana to look. He's a man amongst boys on the high school football field. But then you dive into the physical traits and say, all right, 6'4", 240, three-sport athlete with a track and basketball background. Then you do watch the film and say, all right, you can see the track background where he's clocked in 11.3 in the 100-meter dash. He is a guy that if you want to put a linebacker on him, he's going to run right by linebackers. But he's also a basketball player, so if you want to put a safety on him, he is going up and making plays with the football in the air. He's an extremely smooth mover, which is something that's you can't quantify on the track and field, but you can turn on the film and say, all right, this is a guy that knows how to move that big body. That's what Matt Ludwig represents. And then he's got an 80-inch wingspan. And you see that on the film too. He commands the middle of the field. And that's something that it's a clear emphasis for Sherrone Moore is we want to get more pass catchers that have bigger catch radiuses. One of the things that I think Michigan certainly struggled with in 2024 is just the wide receivers that weren't that big. They didn't give you that much margin of error. You have to be pretty good if you're throwing to a guy like Samaj Morgan or a guy like Tyler Morris, Matt Ludwig, Donovan McCulley coming in, Jamar Broder, these big pass catchers that allow you you don't have to be perfect when you're targeting these pass catchers with massive catch radiuses. And Matt Ludwig, 6'4", 240 with 80-inch wingspan, that catch radius, especially over the middle of the field, is really big. Now, those are three guys that I think Michigan's in the thick of it with. We're going to move into some guys that I think probably not necessarily a top contender for yet, but a chance this weekend to really get into it. And Jake Krull is probably one of my favorite edge rushers in this 2026 cycle from IMG Academy. He's one of those guys that he's going to walk into a room. He's not going to wow you. You're not going to have your jaw drop and say, wow, that kid's got to be a 5-star edge rusher. Then you turn on the film and say, it's about as polished and as complete of an edge rusher as you see in the 2026 class. Now, the physical traits are there. He's got long arms. Speed to power is certainly there. He just doesn't necessarily look it. I don't care what he looks like as long as that film checks out. And at IMG Academy, playing some of the best high school talent from across the country, Jake Krull absolutely dominated. What I love most about him is he is not a one-trick pony as a pass rusher. 6'3", 230, heavy hands that does really well against the run and has multiple ways to beat you as an edge rusher. He can win with speed to power, just going right through tackles and putting that tackle into the lap of the quarterback. But he can also win with burst and bend and be really, really, really good get off with some really good flexibility attacking that outside shoulder. And then he can win as a technician as well. You see spin moves, you see swim moves, you see arm chops. He's one of the most complete edge rushers that you see with what I think is a very high ceiling. And although he's not going to look it, he's a guy that when you take a look at that IMG Academy film from his junior year, this kid, I think, I really wouldn't be surprised if he ends this cycle as a 5-star because he's about as complete of a prospect as I see coming off the edge in this 2026 class. Another name to monitor is Titan Davis from Missouri. Another Missouri guy, just like Jackson Cantwell. Titan Davis kind of reminds you a little bit of Nate Marshall last year. This really big defensive lineman that could play edge because he's a good enough athlete, could play the three tech because he has the size. He's 6'5", 260 now. And so this is a big, long body that has some real athleticism. Maybe not the high caliber athlete like Nate Marshall is. I think Nate Marshall is kind of a freaky dude, but Titan Davis is right up there. And he's a guy that is versatile. You can get him into the program, kind of figure out what that body is going to look like over the next couple of years, but can be a heavy-handed edge rusher, can be a really athletic three tech. Michigan loves these kind of guys. It was like Chris Jenkins coming out of high school too. Chris Jenkins, we thought was going to be an edge rusher, put on a bunch of weight, maintained that athleticism, became a force in the middle of the defensive line. Titan Davis, very similar kind of prospect where you get a lot of versatility in terms of how you want to use him on the defensive line. Braden Rouse, linebacker from Georgia. And we obviously, this goes without saying, going into the state of Georgia for a top 5 linebacker in the country is never easy. Two things that this kind of signifies to me is, one, I love this player, and we'll get into the player. One, Michigan is not afraid to go anywhere across the country and try to go win recruiting battles. We're going after Ryder Lyons, 5-star quarterback from California. We went into the state of Texas and landed a 5-star offensive lineman in Ty Haywood. Yeah, we'll go down right into the backyard of Kirby Smart and the Georgia Bulldogs and put our hat into the ring for one of the best linebackers in the country. Secondly, to me, this signifies the type of linebacker that Michigan is looking to go to on the high school recruiting trail. We want freaky linebackers who are really good in space. Gone are the days where your linebackers are 6'4", 250 pounds, unless your name is Jay Sean Barham and you're just a freak athlete. You got to have linebackers that can cover. You got to have linebackers that can go sideline to sideline. You got to have linebackers that can go tackle running backs in the flat. You look at some of the things, we've talked about this extensively over the last 12 months. You look at what I think is one of the biggest differences between the success Michigan has had against a team like Ohio State the last couple of years versus, 5 years ago when we weren't having a lot of success, was how much faster this defense is. If you want to match up with a team like Ohio State that's going to try to spread you out and kind of make you run and chase and tackle, you need linebackers that can do that. Braden Ross is that guy. A lot of blue chip talent that's making their way to Ann Arbor. I kind of picked my favorite couple. We'll continue to update the conversation. Of course, if we get commitments, we'll be breaking it down. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.